Let's talk then to the man who is driving change at Heathrow Airport. I'm very pleased to introduce John Holland-Kaye, who has been the CEO of Heathrow since 2014. John, welcome.
Hi, good afternoon. Great to be with you. And can I just congratulate SEMA on this fantastic conference? I think it's one of the best lineups that I have seen in a long, long time.
Absolutely. It is great to see so many experts with us. I mean, what it has done today is impress on all of us just how important the aviation industry has become to the UK economy, and particularly so to West London and the surrounding area. So talk to us about the Heathrow recovery plan that was published this week. Give us a flavour of what it involves.
Well, the Heathrow recovery plan is focused on the local community and how we can help to replace some of the jobs that have been lost through the devastation that COVID has caused to the aviation sector, and how we can work together to help to rebuild our communities. And we're very conscious as the biggest single local employer, if we take all of the companies that work across Heathrow, of our responsibilities to local communities. We have a very complex relationship. I have a vision that people live around Heathrow because of Heathrow and not in spite of it, that we're a real catalyst for people coming to the area because they can see that there are high quality jobs, great opportunities for their children, great schools, a great community. And there are areas where that is absolutely the case and areas where that's not the case. And that's what I want to work on together with local communities to make the area around Heathrow one of the best places in the UK to live and work.
Well, let's pick up on that, because you'll know that our major focus today is this proposed innovation district, this Silicon Valley of aviation and transport. How do you support the reskilling and the upskilling in the community that we will need in order to drive this change?
Well, one of the things we're asking for in the local recovery plan is more flexibility about the way in which we can use apprenticeships, which have been quite tightly constrained by the government so far, but we need to be a lot more flexible. And an example of the kind of things that we've been doing at Heathrow is that we have been developing flexible apprenticeships in the construction area where people are employed by us as apprentices, but they actually work in different companies on different projects over the term of their apprenticeship. And that reflects the pattern of work for many people who are working in construction. But I think we can be creative in similar ways as well, making sure that in a world that is quite uncertain, that people have a bit more flexibility about the way in which they use their training, and making sure that things like apprenticeships are seen as a great way of developing one's career. And I want Heathrow to be a place where we can help people, no matter what their background, to fulfill their potential, where a kid from a local school can one day come and do my job. And there's no reason why that can't happen. We have some of the best schools in the whole of the country. We have super smart kids. If we can make sure they get a great education and a great career opportunity here at Heathrow, then the best jobs in the company should be going to local people.
Okay, we've had a question from one of our attendees today, Hal Savas. He says there are designers and manufacturers of aircraft that would very much like an opportunity to have an aviation technology park near Heathrow for all size companies, so that skilling that you're talking about can take root, so that businesses with R&D in mind can come together. I know Hounslow are considering a green innovation zone. What do you know of that, and how might you sort of feed into that?
Well, I don't know much about the proposal for a green innovation zone, but it's a great idea. And I think that one of the things I've spent a lot of time talking with our local council leaders is about is how do we make sure that we can provide careers and not just jobs, that the people in the local community have a wider range of jobs that they can go into. And I think one of the things we've learned through the COVID crisis is that the region is too dependent on a single sector. And we're not sufficiently tapping into the opportunity that comes with having one of the world's great hubs on our doorstep. And I think that's something that together we need to work on. And attracting businesses to come and base themselves in the area, making use of the fantastic skills and connections that we have is the right thing to do. And it's exactly what we have seen out in the Thames Valley, where a lot of businesses have based themselves there because of access to Heathrow. I think it would be fantastic if we actively develop that more in West London as well.
Let me put the question that we put to Matt, will Heathrow be applying to register as a free trade zone? I think the bidding prospectus has just opened up. Would that help generate employment in some of these empty warehouses around the Heathrow area? Kwasi seems to think you might not have considered it.
No, we have been thinking about that. And what we're trying to do is to see whether it really gives us and the area a real competitive advantage. And it's not entirely clear cut yet whether it will do so. But this is the kind of thing we should be working on as part of a master plan with the local community. And I think that one of the things I've learned over the last few years is that the way that Heathrow has developed over the last 70 years has been very piecemeal. The airport has sort of grown quite quickly and then has been very stable for a while. But the businesses that support the airport industry have been scattered across the region in a very haphazard way. And it's caused a lot of issues for local communities. It's not particularly efficient. A lot of those facilities aren't particularly state of the art and efficient themselves. And we have an opportunity to plan that much better. We started that work a few years ago with the Heathrow Strategic Planning Group, which brought together all of the London boroughs and the boroughs in the surrounding counties. And that was a really good way of starting to have a master plan for the area. And that's something that I'd like us to build on with or without Heathrow expansion.
So there's a number of ideas here, isn't there? There's the Green Innovation Zone. There's perhaps associated Freeport status, maybe you twinning with someone else. But clearly you see expansion coming out of the pandemic as critical now.
Well, I think expansion is critical for the UK in any event. You touched earlier on the need to compete with France and Germany, who are very much now our rivals as a country, now that we have left the European Union. And we need to chart a path for the UK, which will see us as having a confident path to be a global trading nation for generations to come. And historically, of course, that came through our fleet and the Port of London. But for the last 30 or 40 years, it's been Heathrow, which has been the equivalent of the Port of London, opening up the entire world to all of the UK. And that's benefited no one more than people in London and the Southeast, because you have the convenience of global access on your doorstep. And the world is changing, of course. India and China, you mentioned, are two of the world's great economies of the 21st century alongside the United States. And yet we are very poorly served to India and China. And unless we develop the long-haul air routes to those countries, then we are going to fall behind. We'll be increasingly marginalized. Now we have
runway 3, is it? Is that dependent on runway 3?
It is, yeah. We've been at capacity at Heathrow for the last 15 years. What we've seen through COVID actually is that the hub model is the most efficient way of connecting people to long-haul destinations. And we've seen that by the fact that almost all long-haul carriers have come into Heathrow during COVID because they just cannot make their business model work flying out of other airports. So it's a real strong asset for the UK. But unless we can grow our runway capacity, we can't access those long-haul markets that Britain will need to get to. And what we saw over the last few years from all the analysis that was done is that you either have one big hub in the UK or you have none. And that would be devastating for not just the economy around Heathrow, but for the whole of the UK for the long term. We'll be flying through Paris to get to global markets.
And of course, we've got to get travel and cargo moving again. A lot of the focus has been on testing and quarantining and the disruption that's caused to international travel. You do, I know, have testing for outbound passengers, but not for people coming into the country. Why? And would it make a difference?
Yes, it absolutely would. And you're completely right. One of the amazing things about Heathrow is that the passenger planes that we see flying are packed with a whole range of people traveling for different reasons. Inbound tourists, outbound exporters. Their goods are traveling under your seat when you're flying. The passenger planes are the main route for Britain's exports getting to global markets. Our supply chain is coming in on those inbound planes. You can't just say, send the business people to a different airport or send the exports to another airport. It's all part of the same ecosystem that allows long-haul flights to be viable. And we rely upon short-haul flights to feed those long-haul flights. So we get services to places like Tokyo and Mexico City every day of the year. But we can only make that work if we have passengers flying. And until we get people being able to move across borders again safely, then we're not going to be able to get the UK economy moving again. And that's where testing comes in. We know testing works. We rely on it for the NHS. And yet still the government has not allowed people to take a test in order to travel across borders. And our argument is that that test should take place before you even get on a plane, so that you know that nobody coming into the country has COVID. That'll probably need to take place 3 or 4 days before people travel. But at the very least, we could be testing people after they have arrived. Let them go into quarantine for maybe 5 days, take a test. If they're clear, let them go about their business. That is a completely common sense thing to do. And yet the government has done nothing to progress that. They've talked about it, they've put some plans in place, but nothing has been announced. And this is holding back the recovery of the UK economy. And I was reading today that there was a bookseller who couldn't get books in for Christmas because the ports coming into the UK are fully blocked already. And he was saying that things can't even come into the UK by air because there are no passenger flights. And he's exactly right. He has spotted that it is our passenger flights that are carrying goods around the world. And we carry 40% of the UK's inbound supply chain and exports. So while that is closed off, the UK economy really is at a standstill.
That brings me to Annika's, I hope I've pronounced that right, Annika's question. She said, at the moment, air freight cargo is awful. Import rates are through the roof as we bring in 3 times the amount of samples from China as our clients are working from home. We're told it's due to lack of passenger planes. Can't we have more cargo dedicated flights, please? We're bumped off Hong Kong flights 2 times out of 3, and it's impacting our productivity.
I think you make a fantastic point. And one of the issues that not just the UK, but all ports around the world have is that there aren't enough dedicated cargo freighters in existence to meet the need for travel by air. But also they can't support daily flights to some of the markets that we've been talking about because there just isn't enough demand in themselves to make those flights economic for the airlines unless the prices are incredibly high. And that's why passenger planes are such a great way of giving you a just-in-time supply chain, because it's the passengers who are paying for the plane and the goods are effectively treated as marginal cost by the airline. And until we get those passenger planes flying again, the UK supply chain is really held back. And Annika's example is a really good one. If you are a business that relies on a just-in-time supply chain, and yet you can only get goods from your suppliers every 3 days, or sometimes you think it's going to be 3 days and it turns out to be 7 days, it's no good to you. You've got no reliable business. You can't commit to your customers that you'll be able to get the goods that they've ordered to them in time, and you'll lose that business. That's why having this reliable daily service out of Heathrow is so vital to small and large exporters from the UK.
I mean, to that point, we are days away from a critical Brexit decision. Who knows? We may be even more reliant on Heathrow, at least in the short term. Is the airport ready for that? Can it scale up from a low base that we're at now to meet that challenge?
Well, we are ready. Of course, none of us quite know what rules we will be working to, but it is very difficult to plan. And air services aren't things you can turn on overnight. So if the government made a decision to open up testing today, it would take several weeks before we were able to put all the new rules in place, make sure that the planes were coming back and we could start to rebuild again. And this is where we need to work really closely with the government, so we are all working to the same plan. And I have avoided criticizing the government through this time because I know what a difficult job they have done. But increasingly, we can see that the lack of focus on the UK economy and the sort of key enablers of UK trade, such as opening up air routes again, are starting to impact jobs. And it is tragic to see the hundreds of thousands of jobs that have been lost in the UK, many of which could have been saved had we had more focus on the economy. And I don't want to see a single person losing their job if I can do anything to protect it. And getting the economy moving again is one of the biggest things I can do to help.
Yeah, and I suppose wrapping in what you've already talked about, if we're going to be global Britain, we have to be beating our competitors. Are you frustrated that Charles de Gaulle and Frankfurt have had government money poured in. What sort of government support would help you rebound?
Well, you're quite right. Both France and Germany have put money into their aviation sector. They've invested directly into their national airlines. Nothing of that has happened here in the UK. The US has supported both airports and airlines financially. The aviation sector has had nothing at all. One of the things that frustrates me most, which directly impacts on local communities, is that although aviation has been affected more than most other sectors, we've had no help with things like business rates, where Tesco and Sainsbury's, the big retailers, have been let off their business rates for an entire year. And the consequence of that is that we are having to really tighten our belts hard. We are applying for relief in our business rates. And if we're successful, that will come out of Hillingdon Borough Council, Hillingdon Council's annual bill. Well, that's not fair. That doesn't happen with Tesco and Sainsbury's, but because of the way the government's tackled this, it will directly impact local communities, which is the last thing any of us want. So I think what is missing here is that the government doesn't have a clear enough view of the role of aviation in the UK economy. They've seen it just as another economic sector, rather than as the enabler of all economic sectors. And I think that's something that needs to change. And I think one thing that we've all realized through this COVID crisis is there are things that we have taken for granted that we just thought would always be there that actually are more fragile than we thought. It's not a given that we'll have full employment in the local area. It's not a given that the UK will be one of the world's great economies. We have to fight for our place in the world. We have to fight for every job in the local area. And I think this has been a wake-up call for all of us that we need to work together to make sure we can really build a stronger London, West London, Thames Valley.
Is that a lack of knowledge? Because I know you personally have been out. We spoke to the High Commissioner from Singapore a little earlier, and I know you've been out to Changi, and that is best practice. That they do it better than anybody, perhaps. Is it getting people out there to see how other countries do it?
I think that's a good start. And actually, Singapore is a fantastic example of a country which has no assets whatsoever other than the ingenuity of its people. And they very clearly saw that having a world-leading airport and port was a way of putting themselves in a really strong economic situation. They've built an incredibly healthy economy on the back of that, and a really fantastic standard of living for their people. Well, why can't West London have that? We have one of the world's leading airports here. We should be able to create the same kind of economy in the local area, and we need to be ambitious about that. We need to work together to achieve it. We need to be really focused to make that happen. And I think that's something we can do coming out of COVID.
Can we talk about the future more broadly? COP26 is going to put new demands, enormous pressure actually on the airline industry, because it is one of the big polluters. At least long haul is a big polluter. How does aviation adapt to what's coming?
Well, I'm really excited about COP26. It's fantastic that it's being held in the UK, because the UK has very much been the leader of campaigning to decarbonize aviation and coming up with a plan to do so. We were the first country in the world to commit to net zero by 2050 back in February and laid out a plan to do it. We've since then been getting the government to come in behind that with some policy support, which we saw some of that in the Prime Minister's speech earlier this week. But we've also been building a coalition of the willing internationally among oil companies, airlines, airports, and now pretty much all the airports in the world have signed up. We have airlines in the US and China and Russia, even the Middle East have committed to net zero by 2050, as well as airlines in Europe. And this is something I couldn't have imagined just 18 months ago. And what we're trying to do is to get a global agreement to decarbonize aviation, either at the ICAO General Assembly in September 2022, or even at COP26. And that's something I would have been saying even a few weeks ago, but I think it is possible, because aviation's always been excluded from these global climate change deals. But there is a chance we might be able to get it in Glasgow. And I think that would be a fantastic achievement. And I was actually speaking with Zach Goldsmith about this just the other day as something we should be really ambitious about. And it could be a real coup for the UK to lead that change.
Yeah, Matt was saying earlier that, of course, as an airport, 95% of your carbon footprint comes from the airlines and the flights and what goes on around the airport. But because you have this skin in the game, he was asking, or sort of pondering the question about whether landing charges have to go up for the biggest polluters.
Well, we have been adjusting our landing charges to encourage the cleanest and quietest planes to come into Heathrow. But to really decarbonise aviation, we need policy change at an international level. It's not enough for the UK to take action. Even if, in an extreme, the UK banned all aviation from any port in the UK, would that have any impact on global aviation? No. That's a lead that no other country would ever follow. And we'd all be taking Eurostar to Paris and flying from there. We need a lead that other people can buy into. And that's where the plan we have, which is to move from kerosene, fossil fuels, to sustainable aviation fuels, is viable. It's existing technology. It can be delivered by 2050. And that is that wasn't something that was really being focused on even 2 years ago. Now it's already being built into the UK's plans, and we have investors coming in wanting to put their money into these big new sustainable aviation fuel plants. So the future is coming at us very fast, and I think now is the time to push.
I'm a bit of a cynic because I've got an electric car and I look for charging points all around London, and I can see everybody starting to move into electric cars and not enough points being there. And you told me the other day that, we have these synthetic fuels, these biofuels, we've had them for some time. Are you at all worried that the airline industry might move quickly, and yet the infrastructure to support how it moves might not be there in time?
Well, this is where we need a plan, a joined up plan. And what we're calling for from the government is to set a mandate for the amount of sustainable aviation fuel that needs to be blended with kerosene by a certain date. And that mandate level would increase over time. And we want a consistent approach, at least between the UK and the European Union, ironically, but ideally internationally, so that no airline is disadvantaged commercially relative to its competitors. And that's one of the things we're seeking to agree as part of a package of measures at COP26. And what that does is to send a signal to people like BP, who have themselves committed to net zero by 2050, that they should get on and start investing in the production to meet the demand that is coming. And it's balancing that supply and demand that is so important. And that's a bit of what is missing with your electric car example, because in your case, the supply of electric charging points is very fragmented. There is no one person who is putting all these things in place. There's no rule that says that you have to have 5 on every street corner. Those are the kind of things that we know will come in time, but it's a bit bumpy while you get the right balance of supply and demand. With aviation, it's easier. It's a more limited customer base. It's something that is heavily regulated. We can set these targets and get there. And actually, one of the great things about changing the fuel rather than changing the plane is that you can have some countries moving faster than others. You don't need, if for example you have electric planes, you need to have charging facilities at both ends of the journey. And if Heathrow has invested in them and Inverness hasn't, then you can't have an electric flight serving that market. Where with sustainable fuels, you can have one flying one way on sustainable fuels, the other way on kerosene, if the supply is not yet available. So it's a very versatile solution for the sector.
Of course, through Europe, you can move things over land by train and by ship, but long haul, where the big pollution is, you can't move this scale of cargo using battery power.
No, you're exactly right, and that's why for long haul flying, which is the biggest source of carbon in flight, we need to have an alternative solution, and changing the fuel is the only way that we can get there. There are technologies, and I know that there's been quite a lot of excitement recently about hydrogen-powered planes. Things like that are being developed, but they are not going to come in and replace all the planes we have today by 2050, because the development time, the production time, the replacement cycle of planes is too long to make a difference by 2050. So if we're going to hit the Paris targets, we've got to look at the fuel that powers those planes. And the great thing about sustainable aviation fuels is you can blend them with kerosene. So the faster you scale up, the faster you can get to decarbonisation.
Okay. I mean, we're almost out of time, but it sounds to me there's real optimism there, and I like your enthusiasm for what is coming. You're confident, are you, that we can continue to do the same amount of business while meeting those carbon targets?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And in fact, if the enemy is carbon, the enemy is not aviation, and this often gets confused when I'm speaking to environmentalists. What we need to do is to take the carbon out of aviation, and then aviation is not an issue as far as climate change is concerned. Is that easy? No, none of this is easy. If it was, we'd have done it a long time ago. But for the first time, you have the chief executives of Heathrow, British Airways, American Airlines, China Southern saying, we want to decarbonize our sector. That was unimaginable just 2 or 3 years ago. But the fact that we have stood up and said, we want to be part of the solution, we don't want aviation to be left out of global climate change deals in the future, is really starting to change the dial. And what we're trying to do as a sector is to give the politicians permission to include us in those global climate change deals. And I think we can get there. Okay.
Well, John, we've taken up enough of your time. It's really generous of you to spend some time with us sharing your thoughts. I'm going to leave you just with one question that's come from Dan, who says, are you at all concerned that we're working through Zoom and other online platforms as we are today, and that's going to hit flying, potentially, take away your customers?
Well, what we don't know is how technology is going to change things once we come out of this crisis. And in particular for business travelers, quite often this kind of conference would be held in some exotic country and people would fly to get there. That may change in the long term. But what we do know is that if you are a tourist and you want to go and visit somewhere, you can't do that by Zoom. If you want to visit your granny in Australia who is getting too old to travel, you can't do that by Zoom. And that kind of business makes up 2/3 of all of our customer Heathrow today. And we also know that the global economy is growing, and aviation is one of the key enablers of that growth. China and India will keep on growing. And if we are going to support the kind of future that West London and Britain could have as one of the world's great trading nations, we need to have a bigger aviation sector to be able to serve that. And if we can do that in a zero carbon way, then we can secure the future of our economy for future generations. And I think that would be a fantastic legacy to leave.
John, wonderful to have your company this afternoon. Really important to get your thoughts on all of this. And I'm sure everyone listening was hugely interested to hear not just the problems that are ahead of us, but also the vast opportunities which we need to grasp as well. So thank you for that.